Michael's lost mission. The cursed sanctuary of the saints me name is Michael. I had just returned from military service, my body still bearing the scars of war. I wasn't a man easily shaken. I had seen things that would haunt most people for a lifetime, but nothing could have prepared me for this place. I went to the hospital for a routine checkup. The waiting room was nearly empty, odd for a hospital of this size. The receptionist barely looked up as she handed me a clipboard. "Please, wait here for a moment," she said. I sat. I waited. Minutes passed. No one called my name. The silence became oppressive. From the hallway to my right, I heard something, a faint, distant weeping. I stood up, my instincts kicking in. I followed the sound. The hallway was long and dimly lit, stretching far beyond what should have been possible inside the building. Then I saw them, the murals, painted across the walls, illuminated by flickering lights. They depicted saints, but their faces, they were wrong, twisted into expressions of agony and terror, as if they weren't blessed, but cursed. I felt an icy chill creep up my spine. That's when I noticed the man standing at the end of the hallway. He wore a priest's robe, his head bowed, hands clasped in silent prayer. I hesitated. "Sir," I called out. Slowly, he lifted his head, and my stomach twisted in horror. His eyes were missing. Only two hollow sockets stared back at me, yet somehow, he was smiling. The priest turned and opened a wooden door behind him. Then, without a word, he stepped inside and disappeared. I should have walked away. I should have left the hospital and never come back. But something pulled me forward. I followed him inside. I descended a spiral stone staircase, each step taking me deeper into somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. The air grew colder. At the bottom I stepped into a grand hall. It was ancient, nothing like a hospital. It looked more like a medieval cathedral, but far more sinister, mummified. Saints stood in alcoves along the walls, their rotting hands clasped in prayer. At the center of the room, a massive altar stood beneath a domed ceiling. On the altar, there was a book, old leather-bound, and covered in symbols I couldn't understand. But one thing stood out, a phrase carved into the stone beneath it. Sancti maledicti Latin, the cursed saints. Suddenly the bells rang loud, deafening. The sound shook the walls, dust raining from above. I turned to run, but the priest was behind me. He was not alone. Figures in dark robes emerged from the shadows. Their faces were hidden, their whispered prayers filling the air. Then they started chanting my name. Michael, Michael, Michael. I backed away, my heart pounding. Then, the priest spoke. "You have come to repent, soldier. You have come to pay your debt." I shook my head, stepping backward. "I don't know what you're talking about." "But..." The priest only smiled wider. His teeth were too sharp. "Kneel." The chanting grew louder. The walls shook. The saints in the alcoves, they were moving, their dry, skeletal hands unclasped, their heads turned toward me. I heard bones cracking as they took their first steps in centuries. The priest raised his arms. The figures in robes fell to their knees. The altar began to glow with a sickly red light. Something was coming. I ran. I turned and sprinted toward the exit, my breath ragged. The saints' whispers chased me. I bolted through the door and up the spiraling staircase, the bells thundering in my ears. The priest's voice echoed after me. "You cannot escape the saints' judgment." I burst through the door and slammed it shut. The hallway was empty again. The lights were calm, as if nothing had happened. I was back, but I knew I had not escaped. I left the hospital that day. I never returned. I told myself it was all a hallucination, a fever dream, a symptom of exhaustion. But then the bells followed me every night, in my apartment, in my sleep. I hear them, distant at first, but getting closer. And last night, I heard a knock at my door. When I looked through the peephole, there was no one there, just a piece of paper slid under the door. I picked it up with shaking hands. Only 2 words were written on it. Kneel, now. The saints haven't forgotten me, and I know the truth now. The hospital was never a hospital. It was a sanctuary for the cursed. And once you've entered their domain, they never let you go. Charlotte's forgotten escape. The whispers of the forest me name is Charlotte. My whole life I've been fascinated by the world of medicine, which is why I was thrilled to begin my internship at the hospital. On my first day, I found myself lost in the chaos of bustling doctors and hurried footsteps. But something felt off. The upper floors of the hospital were under renovation. I heard whispers between staff members. No one goes up there. That section has been closed for years. A normal person would have taken that as a warning, but I've never been normal. So that night, when my shift ended, I stayed behind. I waited until the hallways were empty. Then, silently, I climbed the forbidden staircase. As I reached the top, a wave of cold, rancid air hit me. The entire upper floor was decayed, walls covered in mold and peeling paint. The air was damp, thick with the stench of something rotten. A metal plaque caught my attention. Room 301, former patient ward. The door was slightly open, and from inside, I heard breathing. Not normal breathing. Ragged, wet, like someone drowning in their own lungs. I should have turned back, but my feet moved forward on their own. I stepped inside. The room was filled with empty hospital beds, their sheets torn and soaked in something dark. The floor creaked under my weight, and then I saw it, a dusty old recording device on a bedside table. I hesitated, then pressed play. A voice crackled to life, hoarse and terrified. Subject 23. Subject 23 is uncontrollable. The patient must be transferred to the forest. The forest. I knew there was a small hospital garden behind the building, but what forest? I glanced around the room, my pulse hammering. That's when the door slammed shut, and the entire hospital shook as if an earthquake had struck. The walls groaned, cracks forming, plaster crumbling to dust. I ran. I threw myself against the door. It wouldn't budge, then silence. Only the faint sound of dripping water. I turned. A hole had appeared in the wall. A passage. Dark, beckoning. I had no choice. I crawled inside. When I emerged, I wasn't in the hospital anymore. I was in a basement. But not just any basement. This place was wrong. The walls were lined with metal shelves, stacked with rusty medical tools and sealed patient files. Everything was covered in dust and cobwebs, as if this place had been forgotten for decades. A single light flickered overhead, casting long shadows. Then, I saw it, a yellowed, crumbling map pinned to the wall. It showed the hospital grounds and beyond it, a massive forest. It shouldn't be there. It wasn't supposed to be there. But the map marked a path, a route labeled in smeared, blood-red ink. Exit. I grabbed the map and ran. The basement hallway stretched endlessly, twisting and turning in unnatural ways. And then I saw it, a rusted metal door at the very end. My fingers trembled as I turned the handle. It opened with a loud creak, and suddenly I was outside. But this wasn't the hospital garden. A vast, endless forest stretched out before me. The trees were tall, their twisted branches clawing at the blood-red sky. A mist slithered between the roots, swallowing the ground. I turned around. The hospital building was gone, or rather what remained of it was nothing but a rotting skeleton of crumbling bricks and shattered windows. It was as if it had never existed. My breath came in short gasps. I looked back at the map, tracing the path labeled exit. I followed it, my steps slow, careful. The deeper I went, the louder the whispers became. Soft voices, calling my name. Charlotte, you should have never come here. You're not supposed to leave. I kept walking, then movement from the corner of my eye. I saw something tall and thin, standing between the trees. It was watching me. I turned my head fully, and it was gone. But the whispers grew louder. I started running. The trees closed in around me. The sky darkened, as if the forest itself was swallowing me whole. And then I saw it. A cabin. Old. Abandoned. The windows were boarded shut, but the door was open. I had no choice. I ran inside. The moment I stepped in, the door slammed shut behind me. Inside, the air was heavy. The walls were lined with rotting books, their pages covered in scribbled notes and warnings. The only light came from a single lantern, flickering weakly on a wooden table. On the table lay an old journal. I flipped it open, my hands shaking. The first page was scrawled with desperate handwriting. Subject 23 was sent into the forest. It didn't work. The patient changed. The whispers won't stop. There is no escape. I turned to the last page. It was blank, except for 2 words. Look up. A chill ran down my spine. I lifted my gaze to the ceiling, and I saw it. A figure was clinging to the rafters, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. Its eyes were hollow, filled with swirling black mist, and then it lunged. I screamed. I don't remember what happened next. All I know is that when I woke up, I was back at the hospital entrance. The glass doors slid open, as if nothing had happened. Daniel's silent scream. The shadow operating roomie name is Daniel. I know it may sound ordinary, but inside, I am anything but. My mind is fractured, my nerves shredded. I wasn't always like this. I was once a rational person, a man who believed in logic and science. But that was before this place. I will never forget the day it all began. It was a routine checkup at the hospital. A cold winter morning, with a thin layer of snow covering the streets. As I stepped into the building, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The reception desk was empty. No doctors, no nurses, just a single rusty wheelchair, its wheels squeaking softly as if someone had just pushed it. The air smelled of antiseptic and something else, something metallic, like rusted iron. I hesitated but forced myself to walk forward, and that's when I saw the painting. It was massive, hanging ominously on the wall near the entrance. A surreal, Gothic-style artwork depicting a group of surgeons standing around an operating table. Their faces were distorted, twisted into grotesque expressions. The patient on the table was blurred, as if erased. Beneath the painting, a brass plaque read, "The Shadow Operating Room." The title sent a shiver down my spine. I ignored it and walked to the elevator. The metal doors slid open with a groan. The interior was dimly lit. I hesitated. Was it just me, or was someone breathing inside? No, that was impossible. I stepped inside. I pressed the button for the 4th floor. The elevator didn't stop at the 4th floor. It didn't stop at the 5th or the 6th. Instead, it rushed upward faster than normal. I gripped the railing as the numbers blinked rapidly. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then a loud thud. The elevator jerked to a stop, and the doors slid open. I stepped out cautiously, my heart hammering. The hallway before me was dark, cold, and silent. Something was wrong to my left. A metal surgical tray had been knocked over, the instruments scattered across the floor. Some of them were covered in dried blood. Above it, smeared across the peeling wallpaper, was a phrase written in what looked like blackened, dried blood. "Every life is an experiment." I backed away, and that's when I heard it. A low, gurgling noise. I turned towards the sound. The door was slightly open, revealing a darkened operating room. I stepped closer, peering inside. Hanging from the ceiling, swaying ever so slightly, were chains. They clinked together softly, as if moved by an unseen force. Beneath them, an old surgical table stood in the center of the room. The restraints were torn, as if something had broken free. I wasn't alone in that room. I felt it before I saw it. A figure moved in the shadows, its body grotesquely contorted. Its arms, or lack thereof, hung limply at its sides. Its head twitched unnaturally, as if its neck was barely holding it up. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. Then, it turned towards me, and I saw its face. Or rather, what was left of it. It had no eyes, only two deep empty socket spits of pure darkness. Its mouth was slightly open, and a thick black liquid dripped from its lips. I choked back a scream. My mind screamed at me to move, but my body refused. Then, it took a step forward. I stumbled backward, and my hand hit something solid, a trapdoor, without thinking. I yanked it open and threw myself inside. I fell hard onto a narrow, dark tunnel, my knees scraping against the rough concrete. The air was damp and choked with rot. I crawled forward, forcing myself through the tight, suffocating passage. The tunnel led me to a massive storage room. The ceiling was low, the walls lined with metal shelves filled with sealed biohazard containers. Each one had a label dot, and every single label read the same thing. Test subject, incomplete. I nearly threw up. I turned around and, that's when, I saw it again. Standing in the doorway, its eyeless sockets locked onto me, its mouth stretched into an unnatural, silent scream. I grabbed the nearest object, a rusted scalpel, and hurled it at the creature. It didn't even flinch. Instead, it rushed forward. I spun and ran, pushing through the shelves, knocking over metal trays, desperate for an exit. Then I saw it, a metal door, bolted shut, a keypad beside it. My hands shook violently as I punched random numbers, praying for a miracle. Beep up beep dot beep dash click dot. The lock released. I threw open the door and stepped into a long, abandoned corridor. The walls were lined with faded murals, depictions of twisted, monstrous surgeons operating on faceless patients. The exit was near. I could feel it. I sprinted down the corridor, my lungs burning, my legs trembling, and then I saw daylight. A massive window at the end of the hall, with a final burst of energy. I leaped forward, smashing through the glass. Cold air rushed into my lungs. I hit the ground hard, but something was wrong. I wasn't in the hospital anymore. I was in an abandoned asylum courtyard. The hospital was gone, replaced by a crumbling, desolate ruin, as if it had never existed. I turned, my breath coming in sharp. Alice's tears. The abandoned wing's name is Alice. Yes, it might sound strange, but I've always hated hospitals. Ironically, my story begins in one. I had gone to the emergency room for a minor health issue. I was sitting in a standard examination room, waiting for the doctor. I was just about to check the time when, suddenly, the door slammed shut, and the lights went out. The entire room plunged into darkness. I let out a quiet whimper, trying not to panic. Then, a flashlight beam shone under the door. The only thing I could see was the shadowy silhouette of a tall man wearing a long coat. "Do you need help?" he asked, in a voice that sent chills down my spine. Before I could answer, the flashlight beam suddenly shifted right into my face. My eyes stung from the brightness. And then, out of nowhere, I felt something graze the tip of my nose. A sharp, metallic object. A scalpel. The man smirked, and then he vanished into the hallway. My heartbeat pounded like a drum inside my chest. I fumbled for the door handle and yanked it open. The hallway outside was dimly lit by flickering emergency exit signs. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. That's when I noticed the paintings on the wall. They weren't ordinary hospital artwork. They were portraits of patients' faces, frozen in expressions of agony and despair. Some looked sick, others looked distorted. My stomach twisted when I saw one portrait that looked exactly like me. Below it, a small plaque read, "The new victim." My breath hitched. My legs felt like jelly. This had to be some kind of sick joke. I turned sharply, scanning the hallway. Just a few feet ahead, a doorway caught my eye. The sign above read, "Wing D Block." I'd never heard of a Wing D in this hospital before. I hesitated, staring at the partially open door. And then I heard it. A hissing sound. It wasn't like a human whisper, it was wet, slithering, almost insect-like. I should have turned away. I should have run, but my curiosity betrayed me. I took a cautious step forward and pushed the door open. Inside, the room was not abandoned, as I had expected. A pale blue moonlight streamed through shattered windows, casting eerie shadows across the walls. The room was filled with rusty, iron-framed hospital beds, their sheets torn to shreds. There was something about those sheets. They looked as if someone had clawed through them. And then I saw her. In the farthest corner of the room, a nurse sat slumped over, her head drooped forward. In front of her lay a massive syringe, filled with a dark, viscous liquid. I took a slow step forward. That's when she moved. Her head jerked up, her empty eyes locking onto mine. I felt my heart stop. Something about her face. It wasn't human anymore. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, but her mouth stretched unnaturally wide, as if her lips had been torn apart. Then she screeched and lunged at me. A distorted, inhuman blur raced toward me. I barely had time to react. I turned and ran for my life. The sound of her ragged breathing chased me down the corridor. I could hear her nails scraping against the walls. Getting closer, I made a sharp turn and slammed into a metal door. A single sign was bolted onto it: the abandoned wings. I threw myself inside and locked the door behind me. My chest heaved, my body trembled. The hallway was silent. I turned around. I had entered what looked like a forgotten archive room. Dusty shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with folders, hospital records, and brittle, yellowing papers. Something fluttered from one of the top shelves. A page tore free and drifted to the ground. I picked it up. Dread ink. No, not ink blood. Dozens of names were listed in messy handwriting. Bella, Charles, Donna. Each name had a bloodstain beside it, and at the very bottom my name, Alice. Underneath it, scrawled in shaking letters, was a date and time. Time of death, 3:15 a.m. My vision blurred. The walls felt like they were closing in. Was this a mistake? Some cruel prank? Or was this a prophecy? My hands shook as I scanned the room. My gaze landed on a faded map pinned to the wall. It had a section marked in red ink. Secret exit. I didn't think twice. I grabbed the map and ran. I followed the directions through the crumbling hospital corridors, my breath shallow, my pulse wild. Eventually, I reached a massive rusted door at the end of a narrow hallway. Beyond it, I could hear howling wind. I forced it open, and then I wasn't in the hospital anymore. I was standing in the middle of an airfield, an abandoned airport. Runway stretched out before me, bathed in an eerie blood-red glow. The sky wasn't normal. It was dark crimson, as if soaked in frozen blood. Wind howled across the empty tarmac, and then I heard it again. The hissing sound. It was behind me. I turned, but there was nothing there. I started running. I didn't know where I was going, just knew I had to get away. Then, at the far end of the runway, I saw it. A massive aircraft hangar, its doors slightly ajar. Faint flick. Benjamin's journal. The end of the dark corridor. M. Benjamin. My hands are trembling. My pupils feel constricted, but I have to keep writing. Strange, isn't it? Even when fear pushes someone to the brink of insanity, they cling to words. My starting point remains the same. A hospital room. But don't let the word hospital mislead you. This place is unlike any institution you've ever seen. I've been locked in this room for a week now, or maybe 5 days. I've lost my sense of time. Since the moment I gathered enough strength to step outside, I've been wandering the hallways. I keep hearing noises, the metallic clinking of surgical instruments, eerie moans reverberating through the walls, and doors slamming shut over and over again. I don't know what happens inside the operating room, but a few nights ago, I saw a red glow seeping from beneath the door. It wasn't neon red, more like the deep, thick crimson of blood. As I got closer, the sounds changed. The moaning faded, replaced by high-pitched laughter. It was as if someone inside was enjoying a game. I finally mustered the courage to peek through the door, only to find an empty operating table and thick curtains enclosing a portion of the room. Nothing seemed out of place, but as I turned to leave, I saw something, a shadow shifting across the steel table. It wasn't human or animal. It was more like a formless, swirling darkness. The moment I blinked, it disappeared. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe fear was distorting my senses. But my gut told me otherwise. The next morning, I thought I had made it back to my room, but I hadn't. I realized I was lost inside a dimly lit waiting area. Chairs were overturned, strange symbols were etched into the walls, and right there, in smeared red paint or perhaps dried blood, someone had written, "Follow me." That's when I heard Ita whisper behind me, a woman's voice, fragile and uncertain. "Benjamin, is that you?" I couldn't answer. My tongue felt dry, my throat tightened. Slowly, I turned around. No one was there, just a flickering fluorescent light and the fading echo of a voice that somehow knew my name. I tried to think rationally. Maybe this was a newly constructed or abandoned hospital wing. Maybe the strange echoes and shadows were tricks of the dim lighting. Maybe. But then I saw him at the far end of the hallway. A tall figure stood still. His face was unclear, but I could make out the shredded remains of what was once a hospital gown. His torso was hollowed out, as if something had been violently removed from his chest. In his right hand, he held a scalpel, in his left, a steel tray. He didn't speak. He just started walking towards me. I instinctively stepped back, my foot hitting something solid. A rusted key. I didn't have time to question why it was there. I grabbed it. I dashed into the nearest room, slamming the door shut and locking it. Almost instantly, I heard the sound of metal scraping against the door. The scalpel, he was dragging it across the wood, as if savoring the moment. In the dim light of the room, I spotted an elevator, but it was nothing like the sleek hospital elevators I was used to. It was an old-fashioned, manually operated cage elevator. There was no other option. I tried the key. Against all logic, it fit. The metal doors groaned open, revealing a descending tunnel instead of an elevator shaft. My gut told me I should turn back, but behind me, the scraping at the door had stopped. The silence was far more terrifying. I stepped inside. The doors slammed shut behind me. And then, all at once, I heard whispers from every direction. "Benjamin, there is no way out." Panic surged through me, but my legs moved on their own, pulling me deeper into the tunnel. The ground beneath my feet was slick, covered in moisture. The further I went, the colder the air became. My breath formed white clouds in the damp darkness. Then, I saw it. A cavernous space, opening up into a subterranean morgue. Rows of massive glass containers lined the walls. Each one held twisted, inhuman remains, suspended in murky liquid. Some had no faces at all, just smooth, featureless flesh. Others had deep, hollow eye sockets, as if something had gouged their eyes out. A suffocating sense of dread crushed my chest. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs felt rooted in place. And then I heard breathing. I turned toward one of the glass containers. Inside, something moved. The shadowy figure from the operating room was floating in the murky liquid. Its shape shifted and twisted, as if struggling to form a body. But the moment I made eye contact, it lunged banging against the glass with an unholy screech. I stumbled backward, nearly collapsing in terror. That was when I saw it, a single metal drawer sticking out from the wall. A morgue slab. Unlike the others, this one had a nameplate on it. My name, Benjamin. My blood ran cold. The drawer was slightly ajar. Against all reason, I reached for it. My fingers trembled as I gripped the handle.